Hey guys, tonight we're stepping out of the warm, cozy bed you're probably in and into a landscape of impossible cold. You can see your breath not just as a little puff, but as a thick, crystalline cloud that seems to hang in the air before shattering. The snow is up to your waist, and the wind is a physical thing, a solid wall that shoves you backward and steals the warmth from inside your lungs. This is the world before central heating, before triple glazing, before that fluffy down comforter. And let's be honest, you probably won't survive this. Not with what you think you know about shelter. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's a quiet, free way to support the channel. And while you're at it, I'd love to see you say hello in the comments. Post your location and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is listening from. All of us connected for a little while in the dark. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're thinking about survival. Your fingers are already numb, the tips burning with a cold that feels like fire. You need a house. You need shelter. And what does your brain, fed by 1,000 years of fairy tales and fantasy epics, conjure up? A castle, a fortress of stone, thick, grey, impenetrable walls, a giant keep, standing proud against the blizzard. That you think is strength. That is permanence. That is survival. So let's give it to you. You trudge through the snow, and there it is. You push open a 10-foot tall oak door, the hinges screaming, and you step inside, out of the wind. And it's colder. It's not just your imagination. The wind is gone, yes, but the cold inside this massive stone hall is a worse cold. It's a damp, heavy, penetrating cold that sinks right into your bones. The air doesn't move. It just sits on you, pressing the life out of you. You hold up your hand, and your breath plumes just as thickly as it did outside. You reach out and touch the wall, and it's wet. Not just cold, but damp to the touch. This, my friend, is the stone fallacy. Stone is a terrible insulator. It's what we call a heat sink. It doesn't stop the cold, it inhales it. It absorbs every tiny scrap of warmth in the air, in your body, and pulls it deep into its mass, conducting it straight to the frozen earth or the raging blizzard outside. That moisture on the wall? It's the condensation from your own breath, your own sweat, freezing on the interior surface. The castle isn't protecting you. It's actively trying to turn you into a statue. You see the fireplace, a cavernous opening large enough to roast an ox. You light a massive fire. The flames leap up, a roaring column of heat. And you huddle next to it so close your eyebrows are in danger. The front of your body is cooking, but your back is still freezing. This is the great paradox of the medieval hall. That giant chimney, while pulling smoke up, is also creating a powerful vacuum, sucking in freezing cold drafts from every poorly sealed window and door crack in the hall. You're essentially sitting in a wind tunnel that you're desperately trying to heat with a bonfire. Your brand new smartphone, if you pulled it out, would probably die in about 30 seconds. Your body is doing the same, just slower. This wasn't a secret to the people who lived in them. During the Little Ice Age, a period of intense cold that gripped Europe and North America from roughly the 1300s to the mid-1800s, living in these stone boxes was a nightmare. Historians love pointing out that the enormous, beautiful tapestries hanging on castle walls weren't just for decoration. They were a desperate and pretty inefficient attempt to put a layer of cloth between the noble family and the heat-sucking stone. They had other tricks, of course. Here's a quirky tidbit. That romantic four-poster bed with the heavy velvet curtains wasn't a status symbol, or at least not just one. It was a survival tool. It was a tiny room within a room, a textile box where you and maybe your spouse, and if we're being honest, probably a few kids or a high-status servant, could huddle together. You draw the curtains, creating a pocket of air that could be warmed just by your combined body heat, trapping it long enough to stop you from freezing solid in your sleep. It was the 14th century equivalent of zipping your sleeping bag up over your head and hoping for the best. So why build them? Historians still argue whether the monumental stone castles of the north were primarily driven by defensive necessity or if they were essentially prestige projects. Was it more important to prove you could repel an army, or just to prove you were so rich and powerful you could build a mountain of rock, even if it was a miserable place to live? It was probably both. But strength as rigid permanence came at a terrible cost in comfort, fuel, and, for the unprepared, in life. This is the failure of stone. It is strong, but it is not smart. It is rigid, but it is not resilient. Now, let's turn around. You walk back out of that damp, cold stone tomb. You step back into the blizzard. The same little ice age is hammering this continent. The same sub-zero winds are scouring the plains. The same heavy snows are blanketing the forests. But the people living here, the indigenous peoples of North America, they didn't have the option of building impractical status symbols. Their homes had to work. You're thinking about survival. Your fingers are already numb, the tips burning with a cold that feels like fire. You need a house. You need shelter. And what does your brain, fed by 1,000 years of fairy tales and fantasy epics, conjure up? A castle, a fortress of stone, thick, grey, impenetrable walls, a giant keep, standing proud against the blizzard. That, you think, is strength. That is permanence. That is survival. To understand how they did it, you first have to unlearn everything that Castle taught you. You have to forget strong and start thinking smart. You have to understand the physics of failure, the laws that stone violates, and the new laws that these structures mastered. The laws of flexibility, breathability, and true life-saving insulation. You're back in the blizzard, and that cold stone castle is at your back. You've just learned a hard lesson. A house that looks strong can be a death trap. That stone fortress failed because it violates the fundamental laws of winter survival. It's a spectacular failure of physics, and you're feeling the consequences in your numb fingers and toes. Let's break down that failure so you understand the problem you're about to solve. The first problem was conduction. Stone is what's known as a thermal mass, which is a polite way of saying it's a heat thief. Think about sitting on a concrete bench on a cold day versus a wooden one. The concrete pulls the warmth from you instantly, while the wood feels almost neutral. That stone castle is a giant concrete bench, conducting your precious body heat away from you and feeding it to the winter. The second and more dramatic failure is rigidity. Stone walls are rigid, and they are mortal enemies with the most powerful force in the winter landscape: freezing water. Water, as you might remember from high school science, does a fascinating and destructive trick. It's a mainstream historical and geological fact that when water freezes, it expands by about 9%. This is called frost wedging or frost heave. It doesn't sound like much, but that 9% expansion can exert a pressure of over 30,000 pounds per square inch. It's a force that splits mountains. So, you build your permanent stone wall. A little rain soaks into the mortar. A tiny bit of moisture seeps into a microscopic crack in the stone itself. That night, the temperature drops. The water freezes, expands, and pop. A tiny, invisible crack forms in your mortar. The next day, it thaws, more water gets in. That night, it freezes again. Pop! The crack is wider. Season after season, this relentless, quiet force is jacking your castle apart from the inside out. The strong stone wall is tearing itself to pieces because it refuses to bend. It fights the frost, and the frost always wins. This is the physics of failure. And the indigenous builders of North America, the ones who actually survived the Little Ice Age without dying of pneumonia in a four-poster bed, understood the solution. Their architecture was built on three opposing brilliant laws. The first law is insulation, not conduction. The goal is not to have a dense wall, but a fluffy one. True insulation is nothing more than trapped air. It's why a down jacket works. It's not the feathers, it's the millions of tiny pockets of air trapped between the feathers that keep you warm. Indigenous homes mastered this. Instead of a solid, heat-sucking wall, they created walls of layered hides, thick birch bark, woven cattail mats, or, in the most extreme case, the snow itself. These materials are light, airy, and terrible at conducting heat. They stop the warmth from leaving. The second law is breathability, not sealing. This is the one that blows most modern minds. That stone castle was a damp, mouldy tomb because it trapped moisture. You, just by breathing, exhale about a liter of water every day. Add in cooking, sweating, and drying wet clothes, and a family can pump gallons of water vapor into the air. In that stone castle, the vapor hits the cold, non-breathable wall, instantly condenses, and runs down the stone. Now you have a wet house. And since water conducts heat 25 times faster than air, your wet house is now a freezing house. The indigenous solution was to build a house that breathes. The walls were designed to be vapor permeable. They would stop the wind, which is moving air, but allow water vapor, which is a gas, to pass straight through. The hides, the bark, the mats, they let the moisture out before it could condense. This is the same high-tech principle as modern Gore-Tex. The smoke hole at the top wasn't just an exhaust pipe. It was the engine of a complex ventilation system, pulling fresh air in low and exhausting warm, moist, smoky air high. A quirky but vital tidbit is the smell. A medieval hall often smelled of mold, mildew, and, well, unemptied chamber pots. A lodge smelled of wood smoke, cedar, and sage, the clean scent of a healthy, breathing building. The final law, and perhaps the most important, is flexibility, not rigidity. This is the direct answer to that self-destructing stone wall. A lodge built of wooden saplings or a teepee built of poles doesn't fight the frost. It doesn't care about frost heave. When the ground freezes and swells, the flexible wooden frame simply moves with it. It gives, it shifts half an inch, and it settles. Nothing breaks. It sways in the wind instead of cracking. It's the difference between a rigid oak, which snaps in a hurricane, and the flexible reed, which just bends over and pops back up. Historians and physicists still debate the precise R value, the modern measure of thermal resistance, of something like a layered buffalo hide cover. It's hard to test, and the materials were variable, but the experiential evidence is undeniable. They worked. They kept people alive and, by all accounts, comfortable in conditions that would kill us today. So, you're standing in the snow, armed with these 3 new laws. You now know what not to do. You're not building a rigid, damp, cold-conducting stone box. You're going to build something light, breathable, and flexible. And as you look out from the edge of the forest, the blizzard begins to clear. Before you is a vast white ocean, the flat, endless expanse of the Great Plains. The wind here is a constant, screaming presence. There are no trees to break it, no hills to hide behind. It is perhaps the most exposed and brutal winter environment on the continent. And yet, you see them, dotted in the distance, a small village. You see a dozen perfect cones, smoke a straight, thin pencil line from their peaks, rising against the angry sky. You're going to learn how to build a tipi. You start walking. The snow is deep, but the wind is the real enemy. There is absolutely nothing between you and the horizon to slow it down. It's a physical weight, a constant, whining pressure that shoves you and tries to trip you. You have to lean into it, your eyes squinting against the biting, horizontal snow. How could anything stand out here? As you get closer to the small village, you see the genius of the first law: flexibility. The tipis are not rigid, they are giving. You can see them minutely shifting, swaying almost imperceptibly with the worst gusts, letting the wind's energy flow around them instead of meeting it with a stupid, stubborn wall like your stone castle. You stop about 20 yards from the nearest one and just look. You're looking at a cone. But it's not a perfect, symmetrical cone, like a child's ice cream cone. You tilt your head. No, it's definitely not. The entire structure is tilted. The back of the cone, the side facing the relentless wind, is steeper, more upright. The front, where you can just make out a small, dark, oval-shaped opening, is more gently sloped. This isn't a mistake. It's not shoddy construction. It's an aerodynamic masterpiece. That slight tilt is the tipi's first brilliant trick. By making the windward side steeper, the tipi presents the smallest, most stable profile to the oncoming gale. The wind hits it and, finding no flat surface to push against, it streams smoothly up and over the top. It's the same principle as the sleek, sloped hood of a sports car. Then, the longer, gentler slope on the other side, the lee side, creates a pocket of calm. This is where the door is. The wind actually passes over the entrance, leaving a small bubble of relatively still air right in front of the door, making it possible to go in and out without inviting the entire blizzard to follow you. Now, think about rain or heavy wet snow. Your modern house has a flat roof, or a gently sloped one, collecting shingles, leaves, and problems. It needs a complex system of gutters which, let's be honest, you forgot to clean out last fall, and now you've got a nice little ice dam forming. The tipi just scoffs at this. Its steep, taut sides are the most efficient shape in the world for shedding everything. Rain hits the smoked, waterproofed hide, we'll get to that, and zips straight to the ground. It's a historical fact that the steep pitch of a tipi wall makes it virtually impossible for snow to accumulate. There is no snow load to calculate. The wind that's trying to kill you is actually helping, scouring the hide clean of any snow that tries to stick. There will be no catastrophic roof collapse here. The shape is brilliant from the outside. But the real magic, the part that makes it stronger than stone, is on the inside. You duck your head and step through the low, hide-covered door. You're immediately hit by a wall of comfort. It's warm. The wind, which was a shrieking monster a second ago, is now just a distant, muffled hum. The air is warm, dry, and smells pleasantly of wood smoke. In the exact center of the circular floor, A small, controlled fire burns in a shallow pit. You look up, and this is where the cone shows its true purpose. The entire lodge is a chimney. The cone shape naturally funnels all the smoke and hot air upwards, concentrating it into a single point. But it's not just a hole in the roof. That would let in all the rain and snow. At the apex, where the poles cross, you see two large wing-like flaps of hide, and attached to the corner of each flap is a long, thin pole that runs down the outside of the tipi all the way to the ground. These are the smoke flaps. This is the tipi's engine. It's a quirky and often misunderstood tidbit, but these flaps are not just a rain hat. They are a sophisticated adjustable ventilation system. The two external poles allow the family inside, or more likely, someone outside who's on flap duty, to constantly adjust the angle of the opening. And here's the genius. You always angle the opening away from the wind. This does two things. First, it stops the wind from blowing down your chimney. Second, it creates a principle of physics called the Venturi effect. As the wind speeds up to pass over the curved flaps, it creates a pocket of low pressure. This low pressure actively sucks the smoke out of the tipi. It's a non-electric exhaust fan powered by the very storm that's raging outside. It's so efficient that the air inside a well-run tipi completely recycles every few minutes, which is why your eyes aren't stinging. Historians and anthropologists still argue whether the complex smoke flap design was a specific, revolutionary invention that spread rapidly across the plains, or if it was a much slower, gradual evolution that happened in different places at different times. Was there one aha moment from a forgotten genius, or just thousands of years of tiny incremental improvements? We'll probably never know. But you know what it does? It drives the breathability we talked about. Because that hot rising air is being pulled out, new fresh air has to come from somewhere. It comes from under the outer hide cover, which is staked a few inches above the ground, and it gets pulled in along the floor. It flows toward the central fire, gets warmed, rises with the smoke, and is pulled out the top. A perfect, continuous, self-regulating, draft-free convection current. You're standing in a breathing machine, a warm, dry, flexible, aerodynamic shelter that uses the wind to defeat the wind, and the fire to create a bubble of life in a sea of cold. You've been in here for 5 minutes, and your fingers are tingling back to life. It's more comfortable than that drafty stone castle ever was. You've fallen in love with the shape. But a shape is just an idea. What holds it up? What is this tough, translucent skin it's made of? You've admired the design, but now you need to understand the skin and bones that make this perfect cone a reality. Your fingers have life in them again. You're sitting by that small, efficient fire, and you're comfortable. Now you start to see the engineering, not just feel the results. You reach out and run your hand along one of the interior poles. It's smooth, slender, and strong, polished by use and smoke. This is the bone of the tipi. You're probably picturing this as a simple cone, like a bunch of sticks leaned together at the top. A bit like a child's drawing. This is mistake number 1. A random pile of sticks is just a random pile of sticks, and it will fall over in the first serious gust. What you're sitting inside is a sophisticated interlocking frame. Let's go back outside and build one. You've found your spot, and you've brought your bones about 15 to 20 long, straight, slender poles, usually of lodgepole pine, a tree that seems designed by nature for this very purpose. First, you're not just going to lean them all together. You're going to build a foundation. It's a mainstream historical fact that different plains nations prefer different foundations, the two most common being the 3-pole and the four-pole tripod. The Cheyenne, for example, favored the stability of the three-pole base, while many Crow and Blackfeet groups used a four-pole one. The three-pole system, which we'll use, creates a slightly steeper, more wind-resistant cone, while the four-pole creates a bit more room at the top near the smoke hole. So, you select your three strongest, best poles. You lay them on the snowy ground, side by side. About a foot from the top, you lash them together tightly with a long rawhide rope, and you leave the long end of that rope dangling. Make it about 20 feet long. Now for the magic. You grab the poles and you walk them upright. The three butts of the poles are spread out to form a perfect, stable tripod. It stands on its own. The entire skeleton of your house is now based on this unshakable geometric form. Now the rest is easy. It's almost like relaxing. You take the 12 other poles, one by one, and simply lay them into the crotch formed by the three-pole lashing. They find their place naturally, fanning out to create the perfect circular footprint on the snow. You're adjusting the circle, making it a bit wider, a bit narrower, spacing them just right. You save one pole for last. This is the lifting pole. You lay your tippy cover, we'll get to that beast in a second, on the ground, fold it up, and tie it to the top of this last pole. You heave this pole, cover and all, and set it in place at the back of the tippy. This is not a one-person and an Allen key job. This is teamwork. Now, remember that long rope you left dangling from the tripod? You take it, and standing outside, you walk it around the tippy, wrapping it around the entire bundle of poles at the top, cinching them all together, locking them tight against the wind. The bones are set. They are strong, but they are also flexible. They are rooted in the ground, but they give. Now, the skin. This is where the real work, the art, becomes clear. This is not a single piece of hide. A buffalo is big, but it's not that big. The cover you're about to put on is made of 10, 15, sometimes 20 buffalo hides, all sewn together. And the preparation. Here's a quirky tidbit you probably missed in school. The hides were tanned using the animal's own brain. The women, who were the undisputed masters and engineers of this architecture, would scrape the hides, then soak them in a solution of liver, soap-root, and the animal's brain. The fats and natural enzymes in the brain are a perfect emollient, making the hide incredibly soft, pliable, and strong. After this, admittedly gross, process, the hides were smoked over a fire, which is what gives them their beautiful, translucent, yellowish-brown color. This wasn't for looks. The smoke seals the hide, making it waterproof and, crucially, bug-resistant. This giant, semicircular cover, weighing maybe 200 pounds, is then sewn together with sinew, the tough tendons from the buffalo's back. And the sinew has its own magic. When it gets wet from rain, it swells, perfectly sealing the very needle holes it was threaded through. It's nature's Gore-Tex. And you didn't even have to pay a premium for the logo. You've already attached this cover to your lifting pole. Now, you take the two front edges, and like closing a giant, heavy winter coat, you walk them around the frame until they meet at the front. You don't zip it up, you pin it. A series of slender, wooden pins, like skewers, are pushed through overlapping holes, closing the tippy from the ground to the smoke flaps. You stake the bottom edge to the ground, but you leave a small gap. You leave it open to the air by a few inches. You go inside. It's good. The wind is gone, but it's not perfect. You can feel a small, cold draft coming from that gap at the bottom, and when you exhale, your hot, moist breath hits the inside of that coldish single-layer hide and it condenses. A tiny bead of dew. In an hour, it would be dripping in here. This is where the final piece of genius comes in. The liner, or as it's often called, the dew cloth. You bring in another set of skins, or maybe canvas. It's a second wall, about 6 to 8 feet high, that you hang inside the poles. It attaches to the poles themselves, running all the way around the inside of the tipi, leaving a space of about 6 inches to a foot between it and the outer cover. This inner wall does 3 crucial, simultaneous things. First, it solves your dew problem. Your breath now hits this inner wall, which is much warmer because it's inside the house. The condensation point is now in that air gap between the walls, where it's harmless. Second, it stops the drafts. That cold air coming in from the bottom gap, it doesn't hit you anymore. It's channeled upward into that new air gap, flowing toward the fire. Third, and most importantly, it's insulation. Remember our talk about trapped air? You've just created a massive circular pocket of trapped air. This is the down jacket principle. That air in the gap, warmed by the rising heat from the fire, creates a secondary layer of warmth, a perfect microclimate. Historians and archaeologists still argue about the original purpose of the liner. Was it primarily designed as a dew cloth, as its name implies? Or was it first an insulation layer? Or was it, as some beautifully painted examples suggest, mainly a decorative element to create a cozier interior space? It was likely all three, evolving into one of the most effective insulation systems ever devised. You sit back. You are now inside a double-walled, ventilated, aerodynamic, flexible, and warm shelter. It breathes. It's alive. And it can be taken down, packed on a horse, and moved 50 miles tomorrow. But not all homes were meant to move. Not all winters were on the open plains. Now, you're going to travel east into the deep, snowy woodlands to a structure that's less like a tent and more like a living, breathing ribcage. You leave the wide, wind-scoured plains behind. You walk east for miles and miles until the sky is no longer the biggest thing you can see. The trees are. You are in the Great Lakes region, the woodlands of the northeast. The world is quieter here, muffled by snow-laden boughs. The wind doesn't shriek, it sighs through pine needles. But the snow is a different beast. It's not the dry, powdery stuff of the plains. This is the lake effect snow. It's heavy, it's wet, and it falls by the foot, not the inch. A tipi's steep cone would shed this snow, true, but the people here, the Haudenosaunee, or the people of the Longhouse, aren't moving. They are settled agriculturalists. They have vast fields of corn, beans, and squash buried under that snow, waiting for spring. They have palisaded villages, and their homes are built to last. They need a structure that can handle the crushing weight of this snow, year after year. You walk into a clearing, past a tall wooden palisade wall, and you see one being built, and you just stop. Your brain struggles to compute the scale. This isn't a house. This is a barracks. It's a living communal hall. It's 25 feet wide, and it seems to stretch on forever, 100, maybe 200 feet long. It's a mainstream historical fact that these longhouses were, on average, 150 to 200 feet in length, and some were recorded as being over 300 feet long. That's the entire length of an American football field. This one structure is designed to hold not one family, but 20 families, all living under a single, continuous roof. This is the apartment building of the 15th century, and you've been roped into helping build the frame. The bones of the tipi were slender, dead, cured poles. The bones of this longhouse are living saplings, dozens and dozens of them. You're sent to help harvest, and you're grabbing strong, straight, young trees, hickory, elm, maple, and ash. You're not looking for rigid strength. You're looking for that same quality you learned on the plains. Flexibility. The foundation is laid. 2 perfectly parallel rows of holes are dug in the frozen ground, running the entire 200-foot length. You and a dozen other builders take the thickest, strongest saplings, 6 or 8 inches in diameter, and you plant them upright in these holes, like a double row of giant fence posts. These are the outer walls. Now comes the part that makes your muscles ache just watching. You take the longer, more slender saplings. You plant them in the holes, right next to the big ones. Then you, and a partner on the opposite side, grab the flexible tips. You lean back, putting all your weight into it, and you bend them, pulling them toward the center. They meet your partner's pole 25 feet away, high in the air, forming a perfect arch. With bark fiber rope, you lash them together. Thwack, thwack. You move down 10 feet. You do it again, and again, and again, for 200 feet. You are building a rib cage. It looks like the skeleton of some colossal beached whale. It's organic, graceful, and unbelievably strong. But how do they get the wood so flexible? Here's a quirky tidbit. For the most difficult bends, especially the rounded bullnose ends of the longhouse, they used steam. They would drive stakes into the ground in the exact curve they wanted, then harvest the green saplings. They'd build a small, controlled fire and use layers of wet moss and clay to create a steam pit. By cooking the wood in this intense, moist heat, the fibers, the lignin and cellulose, would become as soft and pliable as hot plastic. You could then bend the sapling into the perfect, rounded shape, lash it to the stakes, and let it cool. When it dried, it would hold that curve permanently. It's a master-level woodworking technique, done without a single metal tool. You're sweating, even in the cold. This is work. This is the 16th century version of a community barn raising, and you're pretty sure the health and safety guy would be having a heart attack. There's definitely no hard hat in sight. Now the rib cage is built, but it's still wobbly. You add the horizontal pieces. You run long, slender poles the entire length of the building, lashing them to the inside of the ribs, creating a beautiful cross-hatched grid. The whole thing is a single, interlocking piece of basketry. It's a monocoque frame, where every single piece is supporting every other piece. Historians and archaeologists still argue about how standardized these building plans were. Was there a master architect in each village who dictated the dimensions, or was it a more organic, build-as-you-go process, passed down through oral tradition? Given the incredible consistency of the design across hundreds of miles and multiple generations, it suggests a sophisticated and very specific set of unwritten blueprints. You step back and look at what you've helped build. This is the genius of the woodlands. That stone castle, facing a 4-foot snowstorm, would have just collected the snow until its rigid stone and beam roof cracked under the literal tons of weight. This longhouse? It flexes. When the heavy, wet snow piles up, the entire arched ribcage gives slightly. It sags just an inch, distributing that immense load over the entire 200-foot frame. The curved arches perfectly transfer the vertical force sideways and then down into the earth. It groans, it shifts, it breathes with the weight of winter, and it holds. It is stronger than stone because it is not stone. You wipe your brow, looking at this wooden skeleton. It's an empty cathedral of saplings. It's beautiful, but it's not a house. It has no skin, it has no life. And as you look at the sheer size, you realize you're about to share this space with 99 other people, 20 different families, and probably 30 dogs. The tipi was a quiet, private little pod. This is going to be a city. A smoky, noisy, crowded, living city, all under one long, curved roof. That 200-foot skeleton of arched wood is a masterpiece, but it's currently a terrible house. It's got all the windproofing of a basket. You need a skin, and for this, you don't go for a buffalo hide. You're in the woodlands, and you use the hide of the trees. The longhouse is covered in bark. Not just any bark, and not just little strips. You're using the thick, rugged, and surprisingly pliable bark of the elm tree. It's a mainstream historical fact that these bark sheets were harvested in the early spring, the only time of year it was possible. When the sap is running, the bark is loose, and you can peel it from a mature elm in enormous single-piece planks, sometimes 10 or 12 feet long and 4 feet wide. These giant sheets were then flattened, dried, and stored. Now, in the cold, you bring them out. You're lashing them to that sapling ribcage with tough bark fiber ropes. You don't just put them side to side, you overlap them like giant woody shingles. You start at the bottom and work your way up. A layer of shingles, another layer overlapping it. Rain, sleet, snow. It all hits that tough, waterproof elm and sluices right off. You're essentially building a 200-foot long, 2 5-foot tall wooden canoe and flipping it upside down. It's a brilliant, waterproof, and windproof shell, and it breathes. Not perfectly, but just enough. The small gaps in the bark, the overlaps, they let that water vapor out. It's not a plastic-sealed box. Finally, you hang a thick, heavy bearskin or deerskin over the doorway at either end, and it's done. The city is built. You pull aside the heavy hide door and step inside. The first thing that hits you is the smell. It's intense. It's the smell of 100 people, of drying fish, of damp earth, of dogs, and over it all smoke. It's a thick, heavy, acrid but not unpleasant fog. The second thing that hits you is the sound. It's not quiet. You hear a baby crying 2 compartments down, the thump, thump, thump of someone grinding corn, a group of men laughing, and the constant, high-pitched yapping of a very annoyed dog. The third thing is the light, or lack of it. It's dark. The only light comes from the 2 open doorways at the far-off ends, and from the row of small fires burning like a runway down the central aisle. You are standing in a human highway. This central corridor is about 10 feet wide, and it's the main street of the longhouse. People are walking, kids are running, dogs are sleeping right where you're trying to step. This is not the calm, private little pod of the tipi. This is Grand Central Station with a roof. You look to your right. You see a family compartment. It's not a room. There are no solid walls. It's a cubicle, an open-plan office for living. The space is marked out by the architecture itself. On either side of the central aisle, there are platforms. The first platform is low, about a foot off the cold, packed earth floor. This is the living room. A woman is sitting there, weaving a cattail mat. 2 children are playing a game with dice made from plum stones. This is the work and life area. You step up onto this platform to get out of the main street mud. Then you look up. Above this platform is another one, a bunk bed platform about 6 or 7 feet off the ground. This is the sleeping loft. You can see bundles of furs and robes up there. This is where the family, and by family we mean the mother, father, and unmarried children would sleep. This two-story design is a genius use of space. But where is their fire? They don't have one. You look back at the central aisle. There, in the middle of the street, is a shallow fire pit, glowing with red-hot embers. This one fire serves two families, the family on your right and the family across the hall on your left. This is the communal kitchen. You're sharing your heat source, your cooking fire, and probably your hay. Can I borrow a cup of dried fish? With your neighbors. Talk about an awkward way to find out your neighbors are having stew again. You look up. Straight up from the fire pit. There's no elegant, Venturi-powered smoke flap. There is, quite literally, a hole in the roof. A square hole, cut right through the bark, that has a small bark lid you can push open or closed with a long pole. This is the longhouse's great weakness and its great compromise. With 20 fires running down the center, the smoke just rises. It fills the high, arched ceiling, creating a permanent, dense, blue-grey cloud. A quirky but very real tidbit for you. Archaeologists who have excavated longhouse sites often find that the upper storage areas are caked in a thick, creosote-like resin. The residents were, in effect, slowly smoke-curing everything they owned, including their own lungs. The joke about a smoky city is not a joke, it's a literal description. Your 21st century lungs would probably tap out in an hour. You walk further down the aisle. You pass another fire, another set of families, and you look up above the sleeping platforms. The entire vaulted ceiling, high up in that smoky darkness, is a massive attic. You see braids of corn, hundreds of them, hanging. You see nets of dried squash, smoked fish, bundles of furs, snowshoes, tools, and stacks of dry firewood. Historians still argue about the efficiency of this smoke hole system. Was it a crude, choking failure, or was it a deliberate, complex system designed to use the smoke to preserve food and keep the upper structure dry and free of insects? Given that they lived this way for centuries, it was clearly working, even if it wasn't pleasant by modern standards. This structure is a masterpiece of social engineering. It's a historical fact that Haudenosaunee society was matrilineal. That means the women owned the longhouse. They owned the compartments, the food, the tools, and even the children. When a man got married, he left his mother's longhouse and moved into his wife's. And the whole house was run by a clan mother, a senior woman who was essentially the landlord, the judge, and the CEO. If a man wasn't pulling his weight, or was just generally being a jerk, his wife, at the prompting of the clan mother, could literally put his belongings outside the door. And that was it. You were out. Now you have to walk past all your in-laws, all your neighbors, all the way down that 200-foot-long street of shame and go back to your mom's house. That's a social dynamic that probably kept a lot of arguments quiet. You're living, working, and sleeping within 10 feet of your mother-in-law, your aunts, your cousins, and 20 other families. It's a world of shared heat, shared food, shared work, and absolutely zero privacy. But in the deep, heavy snows of a woodland winter, this communal, smoky, noisy, living building was a fortress of warmth and community. It's amazing. But it's a lot. It's a social commitment. The teepee was for a small, mobile family. The longhouse is for a whole town. What if you're somewhere in between? What if you're a single family, but you're not moving, and you're buried in that same deep woodland snow? You'd need a different design. Smaller, chozier, rounder, dom. You step back out of the longhouse, pulling the heavy bearskin door shut. The sudden silence of the snowy forest is almost deafening. Your ears are ringing. The air smells clean, just pine and cold. That smoky city was an incredible feat of community, a warm, living fortress against the winter, but it was also a lot. All that noise, the lack of privacy, the feeling of living in a 200-foot-long hallway with your entire extended family, their in-laws and all their dogs. You find yourself craving something smaller, something yours. You walk, pushing further north, into the subarctic or perhaps just west, into the deep woodlands around the Great Lakes, the territory of the Anishinaabe. The snow here is just as deep, the cold just as sharp. The longhouse was one solution, but it's not the only one. You come into a small clearing, and you see them. Dotted among the snow-draped firs are perfect, rounded domes. They look like small, snow-covered hills, but each one has a thin, lazy curl of smoke rising from a single point at its apex. They look cozy, peaceful. This is the wigwam, or wiggiwam. It's not a cone like the tipi, or a long tunnel like the longhouse. It's a dome. And as any good engineer will tell you, a dome is one of the strongest structures humans can build, perfectly designed to handle a uniform, heavy load. Like, for instance, 4 feet of wet, cement-heavy snow. Let's build one. You're not going to need the massive timber harvesting crew from the longhouse. This is a family affair. You just need you, a partner, and a good eye for the right trees. You find a stand of young, whippy saplings, maple, willow, or ash are perfect. You're looking for poles that are about 15 to 20 feet long and, most importantly, flexible. You find your spot, a patch of level ground sheltered by a thick stand of pines. You clear the snow, and with a pointed stick, you draw a circle on the frozen earth, maybe 14 feet across. This is your footprint. Using a sharpened stone or a good trade axe, you cut your poles. Now, you dig small holes, or just drive the sharpened butts of the poles deep into the ground all around the perimeter of your circle. You've just built a circular cage of sticks, all pointing straight up. It looks a bit like a sad, leafless shrub. Now, the magic. You grab a pole, and your partner grabs the one on the exact opposite side of the circle. You both pull, bending the living saplings in a high, graceful arch toward the center. When they meet, 10 feet above your head, you lash them together tightly. You've just made the first rib of your dome. You do it again, with 2 more opposite poles, at a 90-degree angle to the first. Now you have a perfect 4-ribbed skeleton. The rest is just filling in the gaps, bending the remaining poles to this central hub and lashing them down. And those lashings. This is the quirky tidbit. You're not just using vine or bark rope, though that works. For the key structural joints, you might be using babiche-thin, tough strips of rawhide. You soak the rawhide in water until it's soft and stretchy, then wrap the joint as tightly as you can. Here's the genius. Over the next 24 hours, in the cold, dry winter air, that rawhide dries and shrinks. It pulls the joint with a force of hundreds of pounds, making the entire frame incredibly taut, strong, and spring-loaded. You could practically bounce a rock off it. Your new home is a 4-foot-wide spring, just waiting to push back against the sky. Next, you add the horizontal hoops. Starting from the bottom, you lash smaller, even more flexible saplings around the frame, creating that familiar basket weave grid. This locks everything in place. The whole structure is now a single, unified, monocoque dome. You can go up and shove the wall. The entire building gives a little and then shoves right back. You're pretty sure your 16th century health and safety guy would be much happier here, until he realizes you're about to put a fire in the middle of a wooden basket. Don't worry, there's a plan for that. This is the ultimate answer to heavy snow. Remember that rigid stone castle, cracking under the frost? Remember the longhouse, which had to be massive to handle the load? The wigwam has a different, almost cheeky response. When a foot of heavy, wet snow piles on top, the dome just sags. It gives. The force is distributed perfectly, instantaneously, down every single one of those arched ribs and hoops, harmlessly into the earth. It's the architectural equivalent of a shrug. Heavy snow? Whatever. It doesn't fight the weight, it flexes with it. Then, when the snow melts or you push it off, the spring-loaded frame pops right back up to its original shape. This is a mainstream historical fact. This simple, flexible, and incredibly effective dome was the dominant form of housing for dozens of Algonquian-speaking nations all across the Great Lakes, the subarctic, and down the entire East Coast. When the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth, the Wampanoag people they met were living in Wheatus, their version of this exact same time-tested design. Historians and archaeologists still argue about the permanence of these structures, especially in the subarctic regions where people moved to follow game. Were they permanent villages, or were they just the frames? Many believe that families would build these sturdy, dome-shaped skeletons at their regular seasonal hunting or fishing grounds. Then, when they moved, they would take the valuable, labor-intensive coverings, the mats and skins, with them, leaving the bones behind. When they returned next winter, their house frame would be waiting, ready to be reskinned and brought back to life. It's the original pop-up house, with a pre-built frame. It pulls the joint with a force of hundreds of pounds, making the entire frame incredibly taut, strong, and spring-loaded. You could practically bounce a rock off it. Your new home is a 4-foot wide spring, just waiting to push back against the sky. But it's still a basket. The wind is blowing right through it. It's time to put on the skin, and this is where the wigwam truly becomes a home. You're not just going to throw on some bark like the longhouse. You're going to create a high-tech, layered microclimate. You've built a masterpiece of tension and flexibility. That dome of spring-loaded saplings is a beautiful, organic piece of sculpture. But as you stand inside it, you realize it's a basket. A very strong, very round basket. And the subarctic wind, which has all the patience in the world, is blowing straight through the gaps, carrying your body heat with it. A basket is a terrible place to spend a sub-zero night. You need a skin, but not just any skin. You're going to create a high-tech, layered, living skin. You're not going to use buffalo hide. You're in the deep woods. You could use elm bark like the longhouse, but that's better for a giant, rigid structure. Your dome is smaller, more refined. It deserves a more refined, multi-layered solution. You're going to use two of the most underrated and brilliant materials in the natural world, cattails and birch bark. First, the insulation. You need that fluffy, trapped air layer. You need the down jacket. And you're going to get it from the swamp. All last summer, the women of your new adopted family group were spending sunny, dry days harvesting. Not corn, not beans, but cattails. Thousands of them. It's a mainstream historical fact that cattail leaves, when dried, are one of the most effective natural insulators on the planet. Why? Because if you slice one open, you'll see it's not a leaf. It's a bundle of tiny, hollow, straw-like tubes. It's a natural box. Spring, a structure designed to trap air. The women have spent months weaving these dried leaves into enormous, beautiful, flexible mats. Some are 5 feet wide and 10 feet long. The weaving is so tight, the mats are almost waterproof on their own. You go to pick one up, and it's heavy. It's a dense, thick, pliable blanket. This isn't just a craft. It's a high-stakes industrial process. A single mat might represent 40 hours of harvesting, drying, and weaving. They are, quite literally, as valuable as life. You take these huge, insulating mats, and you drape them over the sapling frame. You start at the bottom and you work your way up, overlapping them, just like shingles. The whole dome is now covered in a thick, fluffy, tangent-colored blanket. It already feels quieter, cozier, but you're not done. This layer is your insulation, but it's not your weatherproofing. A heavy, soaking rain would turn your fluffy mat into a soggy, 500-pound sponge. And a frozen sponge is not a good insulator. Now, you need the Gore-Tex. You need the shell. And for this, you turn to the most iconic tree of the North, the paper birch. Here's a quirky tidbit. You can tell a wigwam was built for winter because of the color of its birch bark. Birch bark harvested in spring or summer, when the sap is running, is a beautiful, pale, almost white color. But winter harvested bark, which is much harder to get but is thicker and tougher, is a deep reddish orange. That's the heavy-duty stuff. This bark is nature's perfect building material. It is 100% waterproof. It is incredibly rot-resistant, thanks to the high concentration of an oil called betulin. This oil, by the way, is also wildly flammable, which is why a scrap of birch bark is the best fire starter in the north, even if it's soaking wet. You can just scrape it a little, and it'll catch a spark. A handy survival tip when your house isn't on fire, which you're now trying to avoid. No sparks, please. You're using large sheets of this thick orange-red bark, but they're not big enough to cover the whole house. So, just like the elm bark, you lay them on as shingles. But how do you fasten them? You can't just nail them. You sew them. You take thin, pliable, incredibly strong spruce root, dug up from the forest floor, split and soaked. You use a bone awl to punch small holes, and you literally stitch the bark shingles, both to each other and, in key places, through the cattail mat and to the sapling frame. This is not a quick job. This is meticulous, slow, finger-cramping work. It's the 16th century equivalent of roofing your house with a needle and thread. Archaeologists and ethnobotanists still debate the exact layering order. We've put the mats on, then the bark. But some evidence suggests groups in different regions did it differently. Did they hang the mats inside the frame, like the Tippy's dew cloth, and put the bark on the outside, creating a ventilated air gap? Did they put the bark on first, and then the mats, using the mats to hold the bark down? Or did the layering change with the season? It's likely all three were true. The right way was whatever worked for that specific microclimate, for that family, using the materials at hand. You've finished. The last bark shingle is stitched down. The smoke hole at the top is ringed with a collar of bark, and you've got a flat bark lid you can pull over it with a pole. You go to the door, a low, arched opening, and hang a heavy, thick-furred bear skin over it. You step inside, and the world disappears. The shrieking wind, gone. It's just a distant, muffled whoosh. The biting cold, gone. It's 70 degrees. A small, bright fire is burning in the central fire pit. The light in here is beautiful. It's not the dark, smoky fog of the longhouse. The inner bark of the birch is a pale tan, and the cattail mats are a warm yellow. The light from the fire reflects off them, filling the dome with a soft, golden, glowing light. You take a deep breath. It smells of home. It smells of dry wood, of the subtle, grassy scent of the cattail mats, and the faint, almost vanilla smell of the birch bark. It does not smell of mildew. It does not smell of damp. You've done it. You've created a perfect microclimate. The fire radiates heat. The inner layer of mats, or bark, depending on your debated method, heats up. The insulating layer of cattail mat air pockets traps that heat, preventing it from escaping. The outer layer of birch bark blocks 100% of the wind and moisture, protecting the insulation. The small, efficient smoke hole is pulling just enough air through the fire to keep it clean, but the dome is so well insulated that the fire can be tiny. You're probably burning 1/10 the wood of that guy in the drafty stone castle. You are inside a warm, dry, breathable, waterproof and windproof bubble. It is, for all intents and purposes, a 16th century smart home. This is the genius of the woodlands. The tipi was a masterpiece of aerodynamics. The longhouse was a fortress of community. This wigwam, this is a nest. A warm, quiet, perfectly insulated nest. You have mastered the woods. You have mastered the plains. You are warm, dry, and safe. But now you are going to walk north. You're going to keep walking until the trees stop, until there are no more saplings to bend, no more bark to peel. You're going to a place where the only building material is the blizzard itself. You're going to the Arctic. You're walking away from that warm, cozy birch bark nest. You loved that little wigwam, that perfect dome of the woodlands. It felt like the ultimate logical, small family shelter. But you keep walking. You're heading north. You keep walking until the pines and the firs get shorter, becoming stunted, twisted little things that look like they're in constant pain. Then, after a while, they're just gone. There are no more trees. There is no more bark. There are no more saplings to bend. You are on the tundra, the barrens. The permafrost is just inches below your feet, a solid, iron-hard layer of frozen earth that goes down 1,000 feet. You can't dig. You can't drive a stake. The wind is back, and it's not the sighing woodland wind. It's the shrieking, scouring wind of the plains, but it's colder. It's a cold you didn't know was possible. A dry, hollow cold that feels like it's actively pulling the heat from your blood through your skin. This is the Arctic, and there is nothing. No, wait. That's wrong. There is one thing. It's the only thing. It's the one material that exists here in infinite, staggering abundance. The stuff that's currently blowing at you, trying to bury you. Snow. And now you're going to build a house out of it. This is the snow deception. This is the greatest architectural paradox on Earth. You are going to take the very essence of the cold, the frozen, crystalline water that is killing you, and you are going to use it to build a shelter that is warmer than that drafty stone castle. This sounds like a joke. It sounds like a desperate, last-ditch, and probably very stupid idea. It is, in fact, the single most brilliant act of winter engineering in human history. This is the igloo, or in many dialects, Iqaluit, which, confusingly, also means place of many fish, and is the name of a major city. You see one in the distance. It's a perfect, white dome, glowing with a faint, warm orange light from within. It looks impossible. Here's the deception. You think snow, you think ice, you think cold, but you're wrong. Remember our first law of insulation? True insulation is trapped air. And what is snow? It's a mainstream historical fact that fresh, light snow is up to 95% trapped air. It's the down jacket principle, magnified. It's not a substance, it's a structure. Ice is a solid. Ice is a terrible insulator. It conducts heat, just like stone. But snow is a crystalline lattice designed by physics to trap air. You're not going to use the fresh, fluffy stuff. That's useless for building. You're going to use the snow that the wind has already worked for you. The hard, dense, wind-packed pucac. This is snow that has been smashed, tumbled, and compressed until the crystals have interlocked, forming a rigid, lightweight, and still 90% air insulating board. It's nature's styrofoam. You're going to build your house out of styrofoam. So, the material is a super insulator. That's the first trick. But the shape, you see a dome. But you're not seeing the engine. The igloo isn't just a shelter. It's a sophisticated thermal machine. And its secret is not the roof. It's the floor. You crawl toward the entrance. You don't just duck under a bearskin and walk in. The entrance is a low, narrow tunnel. You get on your hands and knees, and the tunnel dips. It goes down, under the snow, before it comes back up into the main living area. This isn't a mistake. This is the key to everything. This is the cold trap. You crawl through the short, dark tunnel, and you climb up onto a raised platform. The platform, made of packed, hard snow, takes up the back 2/3 of the dome. And it's warm. In the center of the platform, a single, shallow stone lamp is burning. This is the quillic. It's a historical fact that this lamp, fueled by rendered seal or whale blubber with a moss wick, was the only source of heat, light, and cooking. It was the hearth, the stove, and the television, all in one, and it was meticulously maintained by the women of the household. And just that one lamp, plus the body heat of the 3 or 4 people sitting on the sleeping platform, has made this space comfortable. Now, let's do the physics. You inhale, the air is fresh, clean. You exhale, your breath is hot, but it's full of CO2. Hot air rises, right? Yes. But cold air, and CO2, is heavier than warm, oxygen-rich air. So, you're sitting on the raised platform. The warm, living air from your bodies and the quillic rises, filling the dome, creating a bubble of warmth. Any cold air that drafts in from the bottom of the tunnel entrance is heavy. It sinks. It flows into the cold trap that dip in the tunnel. Any CO2 you breathe out is also heavy. It sinks. It rolls off the living platform like an invisible waterfall down into the cold trap. The trap fills with this cold, heavy, dead air, and it flows harmlessly back out the bottom of the tunnel, pushed out by the pressure of the fresh air coming in over the top. You are living in a self-ventilating, passive heat CO2 scrubbing machine. Here's a quirky tidbit you'll struggle to believe. The temperature differential is staggering. It can be negative 40 degrees Celsius on the outside, a temperature that freezes metal solid. But inside, on that sleeping platform, the air temperature can be a balmy 15 degrees Celsius or even 20 degrees Celsius. That's 68 degrees Fahrenheit. That's room temperature. You'd be taking your parka off. This is all from one lamp and your own body heat. The snow wall is such a perfect insulator that it melts. The inside of the dome melts slightly from the heat until it hits a dew point within the snow block wall. It forms a thin, interior layer of ice, which seals all the cracks, making the structure airtight, reflecting more heat and making it even stronger. Meanwhile, the outside of the wall, just a foot away, remains at -40 degrees Celsius. Your landlord, who can't seem to insulate your apartment properly, would be weeping at the efficiency. Archaeologists and Inuit elders still debate the primacy of the igloo versus other structures. For many groups, the igloo was the go-to for winter. But for others, especially in areas with more resources like driftwood or whalebone, the karmat, a semi-subterranean house, dug into the earth and roofed with whale ribs, driftwood, and sod was the real, permanent winter home. In that context, the igloo was the fast, mobile, temporary hunting lodge. But in the deep, central Arctic, with nothing but snow, the igloo was home. You've learned the why. You see the genius. This isn't a snow hut, it's a thermal engine. But how? How do you get it to stand up? You can't just pile blocks in a circle. They'll fall in. There's a trick, a brilliant spiraling physics-defying trick, and you're about to learn how to cut the blocks. You're sitting on the warm sleeping platform of that finished igloo, and you understand the why. You feel the thermal engine working. You feel the cold, heavy CO2 rolling off the platform and sinking into that ingenious cold trap. You're watching the single Quillic lamp fill this white glowing dome with soft orange light and surprising warmth. But you still don't understand the how. How does this exist? You look up. You're inside a perfect, self-supporting dome made of styrofoam. You just can't get that comparison out of your head. You didn't use any wood. There are no saplings, no ribs, no frame. You can't just pile snow blocks in circles. They'd fall in. It defies your 21st century logic. So, let's go back outside into that -40 degrees Celsius wind and build one. First, your tools. You can't do this with your hands. You need a knife. But not just any knife. You need a panna, the Inuit snow knife. It's a mainstream historical fact that this was the essential, primary tool for winter survival. It's not a small whittling knife. It's a specialized saw, about 2 feet long, traditionally made from caribou antler, walrus ivory, or even bone, sharpened to a hard, durable edge. This is your saw, your trowel, and your level, all in one. Now, you find your spot. You're not looking for fluffy, fresh snow. You're looking for a deep, hard drift, that wind-packed pukak we talked about. You stomp on it. It should be firm, not powdery. It should squeak under your boots, a high-pitched, crystalline sound that tells you the crystals are properly locked together. This is where the first stroke of genius happens, and it's a quirky tidbit of absolute brilliance. You don't go get your blocks and bring them here. You harvest your blocks right from the floor of the house you are building. You take your panna and you cut a deep circular trench where you want your wall to be. The blocks you're cutting are big. They're about 3 feet long, 2 feet high, and maybe 8 inches thick. You saw them out of the drift, one by one. This is hard work, and you're sweating in seconds, even in the sub-zero air. But here's the trick. As you cut and lift these blocks, you are simultaneously digging the lower, sunken floor of your igloo. You're creating the cold trap at the same time you're harvesting your bricks. There is zero wasted effort. It's an efficiency that would make a modern logistics manager weep. Okay, you have your trench, and you've got a dozen blocks. Now what? You lay the first row of blocks, standing on edge, in a perfect circle around the trench you've just dug. And that's it. Now you have a very short, very cold, very drafty circular wall. If you try to put a second ring on top, it will just fall inward. This is the secret. This is the spiral. You go back to that first row you laid. You stand inside the circle. You take your pana and you start to shave the top of that circle of blocks. You cut a ramp. You start at the floor and you cut a gentle, rising spiral line that goes all the way around the circle until at the end of its first lap, it has risen to the full height of that first block. You've created a single, continuous, upward sloping ramp. Now, the rest is easy. Well, not easy, but it's logical. You take your next block. You place it on the bottom of that ramp. It rests perfectly. You take another. You place it next to that one on the ramp. It leans back against the first, and it also leans in. This is the physics of compression. You're not just stacking, you're leaning. Every single block is cut at a slight inward angle, so it's trying to fall in. But the block before it and the block below it on the spiral are in the way. As you spiral up, the blocks get smaller and the lean-in gets more extreme. Gravity is pulling every single block down and in, but that force is translated sideways into pure horizontal compression. Each block is pushing with all its weight against its neighbors. The entire dome is locking itself together. It's a Roman stone arch, spun in 3 dimensions, made of air. Archaeologists and engineers still debate just how this technique was discovered. Was it a single eureka moment by some unknown Arctic genius? Or was it the result of thousands of years of trial, error, and, let's be honest, a lot of collapsed roofs? You're picturing some poor guy 4,000 years ago getting buried for the 5th time and finally shouting, "Wait, what if we cut it in a swirl?" We'll never know, but the result is a structure that is, quite literally, held up by gravity and its own desire to collapse. You're getting near the top. You're inside. Your partner is outside, passing you the last few blocks. The inward lean is so severe now, the blocks are almost horizontal. You cut the final hole to be a perfect circle, and your partner hands you the keystone, the last conical plug. You trim it carefully with your pana. You lift it, and you shove it into place from the inside. Thump. A puff of snow. And silence. It holds. You did it. You're standing, without a single wooden support, inside a hollow ball of snow. A builder with his partner, working fast, could have this entire 10-foot diameter home built in less than 2 hours. Compare that to the weeks of work for the longhouse. You're not done. It's still drafty. You take your pana and you go around the outside, trimming all the edges to make it smooth and aerodynamic. Then you and your partner grab handfuls of the soft, powdery snow and you chink the gaps. You're like a pair of high-speed, sub-zero plasterers, shoving snow into every crack and seam until the entire structure is airtight. You crawl inside. Your partner lights the quillic, and you wait. Within an hour, the magic happens. The heat from your bodies and the lamp raises the internal temperature to above freezing. The inside surface of the dome begins to melt. A thin, glistening film of water forms. This water seeps into the cracks between the blocks, and it refreezes, because the outside of the block is still negative 40 degrees Celsius. The igloo is welding itself together from the inside out. In a few hours, it will no longer be a dome of blocks. It will be a single, solid, monolithic shell of ice-reinforced snow. It is now stronger, warmer, and more airtight than when you built it. You've done it. You have built a house of breath and air. You have mastered the tundra. You've built with poles and hide. You've built with saplings and bark. You've built with snow. You have adapted to every kind of cold, from the plains to the forests to the Arctic. But what if the problem isn't the cold? What if the problem is to the wet? You're going to travel south now, way south, down the coast, to a land of giants. A place where the trees are 300 feet tall and it rains. It rains all the time. You're going to the Pacific Northwest. You crawl out of that perfect, warm, white dome. You take a breath of the negative 40 degrees Celsius air, and it feels like a physical slap in the face. You've mastered the dry cold. You've built a house from breath and air. But you can't stay. You turn and walk south, away from the tundra, away from the barrens. You walk for weeks. The stunted trees return, then the great boreal forests, then the plains, then more forests. You keep walking west toward the setting sun until you can smell something new in the air. It's not snow, it's not dust, it's salt. You cross a final high mountain range and you descend into a different world. The cold is gone. It's not warm exactly, but the bitter, dry, lung-searing cold has been replaced by a damp, heavy, wet chill. It's 5 degrees Celsius, and it's raining. It's not a blizzard. It's a relentless, grey, soaking drizzle that seems to come from all directions. The local weather forecast here is just wet, followed by wetter, with a chance of extreme wetness. And the trees. You thought you knew trees. You used slender pines for the tipi, flexible saplings for the wigwam. You stop and look up, and up, and up. You are standing in a forest of giants. These are western red cedars, Sitka spruce, and Douglas firs. The trunks are 10, 15, even 20 feet thick. They rise 200, 300 feet into the mist, their tops invisible in the low grey clouds. This is a land of titans. You push through giant, damp ferns and come into a clearing on a rocky beach. The grey, cold ocean crashes on the shore. And there, facing the sea, are the houses. Your jaw just drops. These are not conical tipis. These are not modest domes. These are monsters. You are looking at buildings 60 feet wide and 200 feet long. They are 40 feet high at the peak. They are rectangular with huge gabled roofs, like some kind of ancient colossal barn. You are completely dwarfed. One of these structures, a plank house of the Coast Salish, Kwakwakawaku, or Haida peoples, could swallow that entire Haudenosaunee longhouse and a dozen wigwams for dessert. And they are made entirely of wood, not saplings, planks. Giant, perfect, man-sized planks. And as you get closer, you see the most impossible thing of all. There is not one single solitary metal nail, no spikes, no screws, no rebar. How? You've built with hide, bark and snow. Now, you're going to build with lumber. The key is the tree you're standing under, the western red cedar. It is a mainstream historical fact that this tree was the single most important resource on the northwest coast, often called the tree of life. Its bark was used for clothing, its roots for baskets, and its wood. Ah, the wood. It's lightweight, it's soft, but most importantly, it is saturated with a natural oil called thujaplicin. This chemical makes the wood almost completely resistant to rot and insects. In this soaking, endless rain, any other wood would turn to mulch in a decade. Cedar just endures. But its real magic trick is that it has a perfectly straight, uniform grain. It wants to split. You're roped into helping build a new one. First, the frame. This isn't post and beam construction as you know it. This is post and gargantuan log construction. You need to find 4, 6, maybe 8 massive cedar trees, 5 feet in diameter, and cut them into 20-foot lengths. This is done with stone mauls, hardwood wedges, and a lot of controlled burning and scraping. Then, you lift them upright and sink them deep into the earth. These are your house posts. Now you need the roof beams. You find a 70-foot long, 6-foot thick log. You need to lift this thing 20 feet in the air and place it on top. How? Here's a quirky tidbit. It was done with pure human power, leverage and time. A whole village would work, building a massive crib of smaller logs, a kind of temporary ramp or scaffolding. Inch by inch, with yew wood levers and woven cedar bark ropes, they would roll the massive beam up this ramp, higher and higher, over weeks, until it finally settled into the carved notches on the house posts with a thud that shook the ground. The amount of coordinated, patient engineering work is staggering. Now you have a skeleton. A colossal, heavy, rot-resistant skeleton. You need a skin. You need planks. You're not going to a sawmill. You're going to a living tree. You don't even have to cut it down. A master builder finds a good, clear-grained cedar. He and his team use wedges and mauls to start a split at the base. They drive the wedges up, peeling a plank right off the side of the living tree. They can peel a plank 40 feet long, 3 feet wide, and 2 inches thick. The tree survives. It heals. It's a living lumber yard. Okay, you have your planks. How do you nail them on without nails? You don't. You're smarter than that. You go back to your giant house posts. You carve a deep, vertical groove into the side of each one. Then you take your wall planks and you just slot them in. The planks stand vertically, their ends held tight in the groove of the house post at one end and the next post at the other. For the roof, you lay 2 layers of massive, overlapping cedar planks, like 5 0-foot-long shingles. How do they stay put in a gale? They are held down by gravity. A series of smaller rock boards are laid on top of the planks, and then giant, heavy, rounded stones are placed on those boards. The roof is literally weighted down. This is the genius of no nails. In this wet, humid climate, a nail-built house would destroy itself. The wood swells when it's wet and shrinks when it's rarely dry. The rigid nails would fight this movement, splitting the wood. The iron nails would rust, and the rust would eat the wood. This plank house, however, is loose. It breathes. The planks swell, tightening the joints. They shrink, leaving small gaps to let air circulate. The entire structure is a flexible, living, breathing entity, perfectly adapted to the wet. Historians and archaeologists still argue about the exact methods of smoke management versus rainproofing. Like the longhouse, these houses had multiple fire pits for multiple families. They also had movable roof planks. You could push a plank aside with a long pole to create a smoke hole, but it's always raining. How did you ventilate the smoke from 5 giant fires without drenching the families inside? It was a constant, delicate, smoky, and damp balancing act. You stand back looking at this cedar fortress. It's a statement. It's not a temporary hunting lodge or a small family dome. It's a permanent, multi-generational, monumental piece of architecture. It's a declaration of wealth, power, and connection to this land. And the inside. The inside is not just a place to sleep. It is a map of your entire world. You stand in the saltwater spray, dwarfed by this 200-foot-long, 40-foot-high cedar behemoth. You've just seen how it was built, a masterpiece of leverage, patience, and rot-proof wood. But a building of this scale isn't just a house, it's a statement. And as you pull aside the heavy carved cedar plank door and step inside, you realize you're not just entering a shelter, you're entering a map of society. It's dark. Your eyes take a long time to adjust. The air is thick, not just with smoke from the central fires, but with the overpowering, wonderful, tangy smell of cedar and the oily, sharp smell of a lot of fish. This is a house built on salmon. The only light comes from the multiple fire pits burning in a long, straight line down the center of the earthen floor, and from the shifting, rectangular gaps in the roof where the planks have been pushed aside. Rain, or, for a brief, glorious moment, a sunbeam streaks down, illuminating the smoke and the space. It's not one big, flat room like the Howdnossie longhouse. That longhouse was a 200-foot-long hallway with cubicles. This is a 200-foot-long amphitheater. You are standing on the lowest level, the wide, central, packed earth floor where the fires burn. This is the stage. You look to your left, and the house goes up. There's a massive, raised platform, 4 feet high and 20 feet deep, running the entire length of the building. It's a terrace. And behind that one, there's another platform, even higher, running against the plank wall. This is not a design choice. This is social engineering, carved in wood. The family that lives here is not one egalitarian group. This is a complex, hierarchical society, and this building is its charter. You walk toward the back, away from the door, which is the draftiest, wettest, and lowest part of the house. As you walk, you are moving up in status. The central floor, down by the fires, is the common area. It's the kitchen, the workshop, the canoe repair shop in a pinch. This is where the work gets done. It's a mainstream historical fact that this society, unlike the tipi dwellers of the plains, was rigidly stratified. It was composed of nobles, commoners, and, at the bottom, slaves captured in raids. And this house enforced that structure. The chief, the highest-ranking noble, and his immediate family lived in the most desirable spot, the very back of the house, on the highest platform, the furthest from the door. This apartment was often separated by magnificent, carved and painted cedar plank screens, creating a private, noble room within the great hall. It was the warmest, driest, and most prestigious seat in the house. The lesser nobles, the chief's cousins, and extended high-status relatives lived on the other high platforms, their status literally diminishing as they got closer to the entrance. The commoners, free people but without noble blood, lived on the lower platforms, or even on the main floor. And the slaves? They lived in the worst spots imaginable, on the cold, damp earth, right by the door, with no privacy, owning nothing, and responsible for the endless, grinding work of hauling firewood and water in the constant rain. You didn't just know your place in this society, you lived on it. Now, look at the bones holding this all up. Those massive 5-foot-thick house posts you helped raise? They aren't just posts, they are people, they are stories. They are carved from floor to ceiling into a dense, complex, flowing tapestry of figures: bears, ravens, wolves, thunderbirds, and whales. Here's your quirky tidbit. These aren't just decorations, these are title deeds. They are the family's genealogical chart, their origin story, and their legal claim to the land, the river, and the salmon stream, all carved into the very structure of their home. This raven crest, it tells you this family is descended from Raven, who brought light to the world. That wolf? It's a story of a great ancestor who was saved by a wolf pack. These posts were the family's identity, their bank vault, and their history book, all standing there, holding up the roof. Some posts were even built with secret, hollowed-out compartments to store the family's most sacred ritual items. This whole house, the stage, the seating, the carved posts, is a theatre. And it was built for the most important event of all, the potlatch. Historians and anthropologists still debate the true nature of the potlatch. Was it a generous act of gift-giving? Was it a brutal economic war, where chiefs would bankrupt themselves and their rivals by giving away or even destroying more wealth, canoes, blankets, slaves, smoked salmon than their neighbors could ever hope to repay? The truth is, it was both. It was the central, lubricating engine of the entire society. And this house was the engine block. A chief would host a potlatch to validate his status, to mourn a death, to celebrate a marriage, or to name his heir. He would invite hundreds, even thousands of people. They would sit on those terraced platforms, in order of their rank, and watch. The chief and his family would dance and sing their family's stories, the very stories carved on the house posts behind them on that central sunken stage, and then from his high platform he would give. He would validate his claim to be chief by proving he was so wealthy, so powerful, that he could give it all away. The house was not just a home, it was a performance of power. You've mastered the plains, the woods, the Arctic, and the rain. You've built with skin, bark, snow, and now giant planks. You've adapted to every kind of cold and every kind of wet. But what if your problem is the opposite? What if the problem isn't getting out of the rain, but finding water? What if the problem isn't the cold, but a relentless, baking, 110-degree heat? You're leaving this damp, green, giant's world behind. You're walking inland, over the mountains, and into the high, dry desert. You're going to the American Southwest, where the sun is a weapon, and you're going to build a house. By digging, you are standing in the dripping, green, cathedral-like forest of the Pacific Northwest, surrounded by the smell of cedar, salmon, and wet earth. You've seen a house that is also a theatre, a bank, and a history book. It is a masterpiece of woodworking and social engineering, perfectly adapted to a life of abundance and rain. But you can't stay. You turn your back on the ocean and you walk. You walk inland, climbing over the coastal mountains, then the high, snowy peaks of the Cascades or the Sierras. And as you descend the other side, the world evaporates. The air dries out. The trees get smaller, then vanish, replaced by sagebrush and rock. The damp, 5 degrees Celsius chill is gone. It is replaced by a 43 degrees Celsius, 110 degrees Fahrenheit, heat that is a physical, vibrating presence. The sun is not a gentle, life-giving friend. It is a white, blinding weapon. This is the high desert of the American Southwest, the land of the ancestral Puebloans, or the Anasazi, as they were once called. The problem here is not winter. The problem is heat. The problem is water. And the problem is visibility. You stand on the cracked red earth and you think about building a house. A tipi? The hides would crack and rot in a week. A wigwam? There are no saplings. A plank house? You laugh. There isn't a tree for 100 miles that's thicker than your leg. So, what? You look down. The answer is not on the earth. The answer is in it. You are going to build a house by digging. You're going back in time to the foundational architecture of this entire region. You're going to build a pit house. You find a spot of hard, dry clay and sand soil. You take a digging stick, sharpened and fire-hardened, and you begin to dig. This is not easy. The ground is like concrete. This is brutal, back-breaking, sweating work. And you're doing it in the blazing Sunday. You are, at this moment, questioning every decision that led you here. You dig a wide, circular pit, maybe 15 feet across. You're not just scraping the surface. You're going down, 1 foot, 2 feet. You keep digging until you are 4, maybe 5 feet deep. And as you dig, you notice something. The sun is baking your shoulders, but the earth you're touching, the earth at the bottom of your pit, is cool. This is the entire secret. This is geothermal insulation, and it is the most powerful thermal law on the planet. It's a mainstream historical fact that just a few feet below the surface, the temperature of the Earth remains almost constant, year-round. The surface of the desert might spike to 45 degrees Celsius and plummet to -10 degrees Celsius in the winter. Because yes, the high desert has brutal, snowy winters. But 4 feet down, the Earth just sits there at a beautiful, stable 13 degrees Celsius, 55 degrees Fahrenheit, all day, all night, all year. You are not building a house, you are building an air conditioner. By digging this pit, you have built 90% of your shelter. You are now standing 5 feet deep in a cool 13 degrees Celsius hole while the world above you bakes. In the winter, you'll be standing in a 13-degree heater while the world above you freezes. This is a fortress of thermal mass. But you can't live in an open hole. You need a roof. You place 4 thick, upright posts in the floor of the pit, forming a small square in the center. You lay 4 crossbeams on top of them. Then you lay dozens of smaller poles, joists, fanning out from this central square to the edge of the pit. You've created a flat, spoked wheel roof frame, and it's below ground level. You cover this with a thick, woven mat of reeds and grass. And now, for the final brilliant step. You take all that dirt you just spent 3 days digging out, and you put it back. You cover the entire roof with a thick, heavy, 6-inch layer of clay and earth. You are reburying your house. From a distance, your home is now invisible. It's just to the ground. The floor of the desert is now your roof. How do you get in? This is the quirky and brilliant tidbit. You get in through the smoke hole. You've left a single square opening in the center of your roof. And you enter your home by climbing down a tall, sturdy, notched log ladder. This is, by the way, an incredible defense system. You're invisible. And even if an enemy finds you, they can't kick in your door. They have to line up, one by one, to climb down a ladder right into your living room while you disagree with their life choices. You climb down that ladder. You step off onto the cool, smooth clay floor, and you just, the 43-degree inferno is gone. It's dark, it's quiet, and it's cool. It smells of damp earth, cedar smoke, and safety. In the center of the floor, Right under the ladder is a shallow, stone-lined fire pit. But you notice something else. There's a small, upright stone slab, a deflector, sitting between the fire and the wall. And in the wall you see an opening. It's a small, low tunnel. This is the ventilator shaft, a separate, small tunnel dug from the surface, running down and then horizontally into the pit, opening at floor level. This is your HVAC system. The cold, dense, fresh air from outside, because even on a hot day the air in a shady underground tunnel is cooler, flows down this shaft into the house. It hits the deflector stone, which pushes it up and around the room, creating circulation. Your fire, burning in the pit, warms the air, which rises, taking the smoke and your dead CO2-filled breath with it, and it all exits perfectly out the smoke divided by ladder hole in the roof. A constant, passive, self-regulating, draft-free ventilation system. Let's follow the Sunday. It's 6 a.m. The desert is cold. The sun comes up. It hits your 3-foot-thick adobe and stone wall. The wall begins to inhale the heat, but it's slow. That immense thermal mass is a heat sponge. It's 10 a.m. The sun is blazing. The outside of the wall is 40 degrees Celsius. You put your hand on the inside, and it's cool to the touch. The heat hasn't made it through yet. It was, almost certainly, all of it. This wasn't just a house. It was a cosmos. You've done it. You've built a home that is an air conditioner in the summer, a heater in the winter, a fortress, and a cathedral, all in one. But it's a whole. It's a single-family dwelling. What happens when your society grows? When you need to store the harvest from 100 fields of corn? When you have 1,000 people? You can't just keep digging holes. You have to go up. But you can't forget the lesson of the earth. You have to take the earth with you. You're going to build a stone house that breathes. You're climbing that ladder, up out of the cool, dark, earthen womb of the pit house. You step from the rung onto the hot, dry, sun-blasted surface of the desert. The 43-degree heat hits you again, a physical wall. That subterranean home was a thermal miracle, a 13 Celsius refuge. But it's a whole. It's a single-family dwelling. And as your society grows, as the corn harvests get bigger, as the population swells from 1 family to 1,000 families, you can't just keep digging holes. You'd turn the whole desert into a gopher-pocked wasteland. You need to go up. But you can't forget the lesson. You must not forget the lesson. The lesson is the earth. The lesson is that 13-degree stability. If you build up, you have to take the earth with you. Archaeologists and anthropologists still vigorously debate the symbolic versus functional nature of these pit houses. Was this purely for thermal efficiency? Or was this, as is central to later Puebloan religion, a deeply spiritual act? Were you living inside Mother Earth, in her womb? Was that small fire pit the navel? Was that ventilator shaft the breath of life? Was that ladder the connection between the dark, safe, spiritual underworld and the bright, hard working world above? You look out, and you see them, carved into the cleft of a massive sandstone cliff, or rising from the valley floor like a living, tangent-colored mountain. This is the Pueblo. This is the next step. This is the apartment building, the city, the fortress, and the thermal battery, all in one. Yes. But this is not the stone of the European castle. This is not a heat sink. This is the stone that breathes. Archaeologists and anthropologists still vigorously debate the symbolic versus functional nature of these pit houses. Was this purely for thermal efficiency? Or was this, as is central to later Puebloan religion, a deeply spiritual act? Were you living inside Mother Earth, in her womb? Was that small fire pit the navel? Was that ventilator shaft the breath of life? Was that ladder the connection between the dark, safe, spiritual underworld and the bright, hard-working world above? You're taking that 3 degrees Celsius geothermal magic dirt and you're turning it into a brick. You're shaping it, or, more often, you're using it as a mortar. It's a mainstream historical fact that the stone walls of the great pueblos, like those at Chaco Canyon or Mesa Verde, were not just stone. They were a sophisticated composite. They were 2 thin outer walls of hand-cut fitted sandstone, and the entire gap in between a gap that could be 2 or 3 feet thick was filled with rubble, sand, and an enormous insulating and heavy amount of this adobe mud. This is the stone that breathes. But more accurately, it's a heat battery. Let's follow the Sunday. It's 6 a.m. The desert is cold. The sun comes up. It hits your 3-foot thick adobe and stone wall. The wall begins to inhale the heat. But it's slow. That immense thermal mass is a heat sponge. It's 10 a.m. The sun is blazing. The outside of the wall is 40 degrees Celsius. You put your hand on the inside, and it's cool to the touch. The heat hasn't made it through yet. It's 3 p.m. The sun is a weapon. The temperature is 43 degrees Celsius. The heat has by now just managed to soak halfway through your 3-foot thick wall, but it's still cool inside your dark, small inner room. It's 7 p.m. The sun sets. The desert, with no humidity to hold the heat, instantly plummets to 10 degrees Celsius. It's cold outside, but that heat, that 3-degree solar inferno that the wall has been inhaling for 10 solid hours, has just reached the inside surface. And now, all night long, that thick, earthy wall radiates that stored, captured sunshine into your home. It's a perfect, slow-release, passive heater. By 6 a.m., it has finally exhaled all its heat. Just as the sun comes up to start charging the battery all over again, it's 3 p.m. The sun is a weapon. The temperature is 43 degrees Celsius. The heat has by now just managed to soak halfway through your 3-foot thick wall, but it's still cool inside your dark, small inner room. And the shape of the building, that's the other half of the genius. You look at Pueblo Bonito, the great house of Chaco Canyon. It's not just a block, it's a perfect half-moon D shape. And it's a mainstream historical fact that it is oriented perfectly on a solar cardinal axis. The flat side faces south. In the winter, when the sun is low in the sky, it shines under the high roof lines and directly onto that thick, multi-story battery of a back wall, supercharging it with heat. But in the summer, when the sun is high overhead, the upper stories shade the lower stories. The high, hot sun never touches the inner walls. It's a passive solar heating and cooling system, 800 years before solar panels. And you thought your smart thermostat was clever. You're looking at a multi-story building made of stone. And you pause. Wait a minute. We started this whole journey by proving that a stone castle is a cold, damp, heat-sucking failure. We proved stone is a terrible insulator. And now, here in the desert where the temperature swings are even more brutal, you're telling me these people built 800-room cities out of stone? But it's a hole. It's a single-family dwelling. What happens when your society grows? When you need to store the harvest from 100 fields of corn? When you have 1,000 people? You can't just keep digging holes. You have to go up. But you can't forget the lesson of the earth. You have to take the earth with you. You're going to build a stone house that breathes. You're looking at a multi-story building made of stone, and you pause. Wait a minute. We started this whole journey by proving that a stone castle is a cold, damp, heat-sucking failure. We proved stone is a terrible insulator. And now, here in the desert where the temperature swings are even more brutal, you're telling me these people built 800-room cities out of stone? They kept their church in the shape of their ancestral home. This was the height. This was a civilization that had mastered the sun, mastered the earth, mastered the stone. They built cities for thousands of people, 5 stories high, with no metal, no wheels, and no draft animals. And then they left. And the shape of the building, that's the other half of the genius. You look at Pueblo Bonito, the great house of Chaco Canyon. It's not just a block. It's a perfect half-moon D shape. And it's a mainstream historical fact that it is oriented perfectly on a solar cardinal axis. The flat side faces south. In the winter, when the sun is low in the sky, it shines under the high roof lines and directly onto that thick, multi-story battery of a back wall, supercharging it with heat. But you can't build a house that makes water. When the one thing they couldn't control disappeared, the perfect machine stopped. You're standing on the roof of this empty, silent stone city, the wind whispering through the small T-shaped doors. You've seen it all now. You've seen the hide tipi, the bark wigwam, the sapling longhouse, the snow igloo, the plank house, the pit house, and the pueblo. You've seen how every single one was a genius solution. You're going to help build a wall. You're not just stacking dry grey rocks. Your primary material is the earth itself. You're mixing the desert clay, water, a precious resource, hauled from a distant spring, and straw. You're stomping it with your bare feet, mixing a thick, heavy, sticky mud. This is adobe. This is the magic. You're standing alone on the top level of the silent, sun-baked pueblo. The wind whispers through the empty T-shaped doorways, and it sounds like a sigh. This was the pinnacle. A city of 800 rooms, 5 stories high, a perfect solar-powered, earth-insulated machine. A house built stronger than stone by using stone intelligently. And it's empty. And then they left. But the people didn't. This is the final, most important lesson. The people left. They packed what they could, and they walked. They adapted. They moved to new water sources like the Rio Grande or to the high, wet mesas. They became the Hopi, the Zuni, the Acoma, and the other Pueblo people of today. They survived because they were, in the end, flexible. Historians and anthropologists still debate whether this failure at Chaco Canyon was a collapse or if it should be seen as a successful migration and transformation. Was it a death or was it a rebirth? The city, the strong stone, was a dead end. But the people, carrying the knowledge, were not. You started this journey in a freezing, drafty stone castle. You were taught that strength was rigidity, permanence, and mass. And that castle was a cold, damp, heat-sucking lie. You've learned the truth. True strength isn't stone. True strength is adaptation. You think back. You remember standing on the Great Plains. The tipi's strength wasn't in its walls. It was in its absence. Its strength was that, in an hour, it could be packed onto a horse and moved 20 miles. It didn't fight the blizzard. It avoided it. It didn't fight the scarcity of the plains. It followed the abundance. Its strength was mobility. You remember the deep, heavy snows of the woodlands. You remember the wigwam and the longhouse. Their strength was flexibility. It was the skeleton of spring-loaded saplings, the living ribcage that bent under the crushing weight of the snow. It shrugged, it gave, it yielded, and in yielding, it held. It was the reed in the wind, not the oak. You remember the Pacific Northwest, the land of giants and endless rain. The plank house's strength was breathability. It was the genius of not using nails, of letting the rot-proof cedar planks swell and shrink, of letting the whole 200-foot-long structure breathe the dampness without ever rotting from it. You remember the Arctic, the negative 40 degrees Celsius wind and the world of nothing, the igloo. Its strength was the most profound of all. It was the strength of paradox. It was the genius of seeing that the enemy, the snow, 95% trapped air, was actually the solution. It was a house built of air, a thermal engine held up by its own desire to collapse, a warm 20 degrees Celsius bubble in a sea of lethal cold. And here's the quirky tidbit, the one that ties it all together. These flimsy homes, the tipi, the wigwam, the igloo, were not temporary, rough drafts of real houses. They were the finished, perfect, final product. This technology, this architecture of hide and bark and snow, was used successfully, keeping people warm and alive for thousands of years. The stone castles of Europe, which you thought were so permanent, most were in use for only a few hundred years before they became obsolete, cold, drafty monuments. The flimsy tipi was a viable, perfect technology for millennia. That's the final word. That's the secret. You've been looking for stronger than stone all this time, and the answer is smarter. The answer is to build a house that doesn't fight the wind, but uses it, like the tipi's smoke flaps. A house that doesn't crack under the snow, but bends with it, like the wigwam's dome. A house that isn't destroyed by the rain, but breathes with it, like the plank house's loose boards. A house that isn't chilled by the cold, but is built from it, like the igloo. A house that doesn't bake in the sun, but inhales it, like the Pueblo's thermal battery wall. True strength is not imposing your will on the world. It's not building a rigid, stone fist and shaking it at the sky. True strength is listening. It's humility. It's a deep, profound, and elegant understanding of the physics of your place. It's the genius of flexibility. And now, your own journey is ending. The wind you hear is no longer the blizzard of the plains, or the whisper in the empty Pueblo. It's just the soft, steady hum of the fan in your room, the cold you felt, the burning in your fingers, the chill in your bones. It's all gone. It's been replaced by the gentle, simple warmth of your own bed, the weight of your own blankets. You've traveled thousands of miles tonight. You've built houses of hide and saplings and snow. You've seen how, for thousands of years, people survived impossible things with nothing but their hands, their minds, and a deep respect for the world around them. You've learned the lesson. True strength is adaptation. True strength is a deep, sleepy, flexible breath. And now, your own shelter is doing its job. Your own home, your own bed, is keeping you safe. There are no blizzards here. There is no snow to shovel, no smoke to manage. There is only this quiet, this comfort, this approaching, gentle ease. You can let go of the journey now. Let the images of the plains and the forests fade. Let the glowing white of the igloo and the warm golden light of the wigwam just dissolve. They are just stories now. And you are just here, warm, safe, and very, very sleepy. It's time to rest.